how do you balance the need to bring in new voices while maintaining experienced members of your team?
You need to balance it. I think that it is a very good question because you should balance it. Part of this is, again, Canadians voted for change, and part of it is bringing in those new perspectives. We have half of the cabinet are new members to cabinet. 9 of the 10 secretaries of state are new. It also means that half of the cabinet has experience. Perhaps they're in different roles, but they're going to be around the table. And what is crucial is how you govern, how you run cabinet meetings, how you run committee meetings, how you delegate authority through the mandates to ministers, so you get the maximum out of that experience and those fresh perspectives. And we intend to have a true cabinet government.
So that's Mark Carney answering the question today after appointing his cabinet, 28 ministers, 10 what we would call ministers of state or junior ministers, however you'd frame it. And he talked about the word balance. So I want to get to Rudy Husny, former advisor in the Harper government, and our feature, of course, brought to you as always by Guaranteed Industries. Ask about their Can-Air climate control systems, 514-342-3400. That's Guaranteed Industries. So, Rudy, first of all, give me your take. I mentioned the word balance, something that Mark Carney pointed out there was important. Is this achieved here?
Yes, I think that Mark Carney did a good move when it comes to having ministers and what we call secretaries of state, or used to be minister of state. I think it's good because Justin Trudeau in the past basically said, okay, everyone is a minister, but in truth, it's not the case. You cannot compare a minister of tourism, for example, with, for example, defense minister. So I think it was a good move. I think that he brought some good new faces. For example, the former mayor of Vancouver, who's now housing minister. I do think that those are good moves. But at the same time, he's stuck with the same team. You can see that Dominique LeBlanc is still there. Of course, Mélanie Joly is still there, but in a different role. A finance minister, François-Philippe Champagne, even bringing back Sean Fraser, for example, who wasn't supposed to run, who decided to run, and now is justice minister, and now having also Anita Hanan. So if you look at his front bench, it's kind of the same faces, but at the same time, he was able to bring some new people in. But there's one big question, and it comes from Quebec. How come a former finance minister from Quebec who has experience, who decided to come back to politics for him, wasn't appointed to cabinet? And I'm talking about Carlos Letao, who just got elected in Laval.
So let me go to that. I think that's the one that has many of us confused. I heard some of the people, just as you described now, not sure what's going on there. It seemed to me that when Carlos Letao, and I remember we had him on the show at the time, it's almost as if Mark Carney had reached out to him personally to invite him to run, because I don't think he'd ever expressed an interest in getting involved in politics again, much less federal politics. So I'm going to ask you to speculate, Rudy. What do you think happened here, or what is happening here?
Look, it is true. I mean, even Carlos Letao said it himself. He knew Mark Carney from his previous day when he was working as an economist and also for the Laurentian Bank. I think it's for personal reasons that he went back into politics. I think he believed in Mark Carney and wanted to play a role. And again, he has the experience. He was able to balance a budget in Quebec. And if you look at the state of finances in Canada, you do need somebody with that kind of experience. I think it was more a question of they couldn't find a spot for him. You can see that he had François-Philippe Champagne at finance, and also kind of a weird move to put Mélanie Joly from foreign affairs to industry portfolio. For example, I do believe that Carlos Letao would have been a better minister for industry with more experience than Mélanie Joly. So those are the kind of questions that people are asking. Look, it's very difficult to make a cabinet. You have to look at obviously having a balance between gender, but also having people from all over the country or from every single province. So maybe there were too many ministers from Quebec, and he had to cut his bench in a way.
Yeah, this idea, sort of regional parity, if we can call it that, right? So you have Nathalie Provost from Quebec, you have Stephen Guilbeault from Quebec, you have Mélanie Joly from Quebec. Rachel Bendayan, the MP for Outremont, not a cabinet minister, even though she had been in the past. Is that a surprise?
Yes and no. I mean, she had a rough start. Remember when she was asked as a newly minted minister, is there a problem in French in Quebec? And she said no. And obviously, less than 24 hours, she had to reverse, for example, her statement. And also at the same time, he wanted to make some space for Anna Gainey, the MP from Westmount. We know that Anna Gainey is a very close personal friend of Mark Carney. So I do think that that was kind of a trade-off. So I do believe that, yes, Rachel Bendayan must be a little bit disappointed. But at the same time, he's bringing new blood with, for example, Anna Gainey, but keeping the same person with, for example, Stephen Guilbeault as Quebec lieutenant. So that's also a move that he's not willing to move Stephen Guilbeault and keep him as his point person in Quebec, especially dealing with the Quebec government.
You know, Stephen Guilbeault's an interesting case, isn't he, Rudy, when you consider he's had a couple of, sort of odd moments as well in previous portfolios, yet he still stays on.
Yes, that's why it's again. So it's difficult for Mr. Carney to basically say, look, there's a change and we're going to change things. But at the same time, having Stephen Guilbeault as the main person, the person that you will see in the media regularly commenting on Quebec issues. So for certain people, you'll say, look, it's kind of the same. Look, we'll see what's going to happen. There's going to be a budget very soon. Don't forget that we haven't had a federal budget. So we'll see what kind of priorities he's going to give, for example, during that budget. The throne speech also very, very soon. So he has a lot of work. I do think it was a good exercise again, and I want to say it again, in terms of having ministers of state or secretary of state, because I do believe that it was a mistake, and I'm talking from my previous experience in government. It's not true that all ministers are the same.
Let me ask about one other surprise for some people today, which is Chrystia Freeland. Now she'll be in charge of transport, and obviously had a high profile in the last government until she quit. Are you surprised by her post?
Yes. And to be frank, if I would have been an advisor to Mark Carney, I would have said, no, don't put her on. I mean, normally Brutus cannot be again in cabinet. She betrayed in a way Justin Trudeau. And I do believe that, again, her position, the fact that she was a finance minister and that she's so attached to the branding of Justin Trudeau when it comes to deficit and high spending. So it's very hard to basically have her. She is in a different portfolio. She's still with transport. She's going to be, for example, responsible of internal trade and if there's ever a high-speed train. But I do believe that I wouldn't have made that choice, especially with all her past history. But we know that they're also close friends and they have a relationship together.
The only other thing I would bring up, and I asked about this earlier on as well, interesting picks in Sean Fraser and Anita Anand, both of whom announced, Rudy, right, that they'd be leaving, weren't going to run, they're going to go back into private life, both of whom turned around, ended up running and winning, and now both have cabinet posts.
Yes, it's very strange because when you look at certain ministers, for example, Bill Blair, defense minister, he was pushed away. Wilkinson, who was also natural resource minister, he was pushed away. And two ministers who announced that they were not running again, who decided that they were going to go back to the private sector, all of a sudden comes back and get rewarded when there's some members of parliament and ministers who decided to stick around and say, look, whatever happens, even if Justin Trudeau stays, I'm going to be there. I'm going to put my name on the ballot. And you see that you can ask questions. Same thing, for example, an Ontario MP, Nathan Erskine-Smith, who also decided to run again because he was a cabinet minister and was pushed away for example, Anita Anand and Sean Fraser. Sean Fraser getting a promotion. He's now justice minister, and he hasn't got a good track record. Don't forget, he was immigration minister, and we know what happened in immigration. He was also housing minister, and we know what's happening in housing.
Which does kind of beg the question, right? When you talk about someone like Bill Blair, who is no longer in charge of defense, he was not really involved in any issues, but you just mentioned Sean Fraser in housing, in immigration, replaced, of course, by Mark Miller after that. Bit odd today to appoint someone who kind of, had these issues in the past. Was that one of the more surprising appointments to you today?
I do believe that when it comes to Sean Fraser, it is because he's a strong voice from the Atlantic. Don't forget that they need to have somebody. Of course, they have Dominique Leblanc, but they needed also somebody from Nova Scotia. So I do believe that his high position is based on where he's elected and to make sure that they have what we've called strong representation in that region.
So you heard Pierre Poilievre, of course, today. His response to this, at the beginning it was, why don't you steal some of our policies? But then he fell back into his old sloganeering, if you will. What has to happen from the opposition here going forward?
I do believe that there's going to be a time where, especially for the throne speech and for the upcoming months, where the Conservatives need to be as constructive as possible. I mean, they did propose some things. It is true that Mark Carney and the Liberal platform, a lot of it were from ideas from Pierre Poilievre, for example, when it comes to lowering taxes. And Mark Carney said today that he's willing to lower taxes as promised. Also, when it comes to housing, don't forget it is the Conservative who's been hammering on housing. So I do believe that the Conservative can play a pivot role when it comes to reminding Canadians and reminding the Liberals why they were elected and to ask for results.
All right, we will leave it at that. I thank you so much, Rudy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Aaron.